Episode 117 The Monster's Embrace. The evening sun filtered through the labyrinth's impossible windows, casting patterns of light that shifted between realities with each passing moment. The castle hummed with its usual organized chaos, 14 children navigating their evening routines, while 54 adults coordinated the complex logistics of a household that defied every conventional understanding of family structure. But tonight, in one of the castle's more secluded chambers, far from the main halls, something profound and slightly terrifying was about to occur between two people whose love had always been defined by accepting the monstrous alongside the beautiful. Jade stood near the window of the private chamber she had carefully prepared for this evening. Her royal blue cloak of levitation settled around her shoulders with unusual stillness, as if the sentient magical item understood that what was about to happen required discretion, rather than its usual protective vigilance. At 26 years old now, she had accumulated considerable experience with her various partners' different natures and needs over the 6 years since discovering her Nexus abilities, but what Professor Gordon Crowley had finally confessed he wanted to share with her represented something entirely unprecedented in their relationship. Gordon stood near the chamber's entrance, his typically professorial demeanor completely fractured by visible anxiety about what he was proposing. His hands moved through nervous gestures that suggested he was on the verge of fleeing, rather than actually following through with the vulnerability he had spent weeks building courage to articulate. His voice, when he finally spoke, carried a mixture of desperate need and profound fear about whether what he wanted to share would destroy rather than deepen their bond. I have been avoiding this conversation for the entire year we have been together. I have been telling myself that my monstrous nature should remain separate from our intimate relationship, that what the demon did to me should not contaminate what we have built through genuine affection and through your remarkable capacity to love broken people completely. Gordon paused, clearly processing whether he should continue, or whether retreating to comfortable distance would be wiser choice than risking everything through articulating desires that felt too dangerous to voice aloud. But I cannot continue pretending that significant part of myself does not exist just because acknowledging my transformed nature makes me uncomfortable or frightened about how you might respond. The demon that possessed me, that merged with my biology and created the monster I become when I lose control, that is not a separate entity I can simply suppress indefinitely. It is part of me now. Part of my body and my consciousness and my essential nature, regardless of how much I wish I could simply be the professor I was before that terrible night when everything changed. Jade felt her heart aching at Gordon's vulnerable confession. Recognition that he was finally articulating something he had kept carefully hidden beneath his scholarly exterior, despite their intimate partnership and despite her repeated assurances that she accepted his complete self, including the monstrous transformation that his demonic possession had created. Her voice, when she responded, carried gentle encouragement that honored his fear, while also expressing genuine curiosity about what he needed to share. Gordon, you know I love you completely. You know I have never viewed your transformed nature as flaw requiring management or as unfortunate complication I tolerate despite preferring you remain purely human in form and capability. What happened to you was violation and trauma that should never have occurred, but the result of that possession is part of who you are now. Part of what makes you uniquely yourself, rather than just being generic academic whose life proceeded according to expected patterns. She moved closer with deliberate steps, wanting physical proximity without crowding him when he was clearly processing something profoundly difficult. Whatever you need to tell me, whatever aspect of your monstrous nature you have been suppressing because you feared my reaction, I am ready to hear it without judgment. I am ready to understand what you need, rather than just what you think I want to hear from a partner who is trying to be an acceptable version of himself, instead of revealing his complete truth. Gordon studied her carefully, his expression showing he was conducting final assessment about whether proceeding with this conversation represented wise choice, or whether protecting her from knowledge about his darker desires should take precedence over his own needs for genuine intimacy. But apparently her sincerity and her obvious lack of fear overcame his protective instincts, because his voice, when he continued, carried decision to actually articulate what he had been suppressing. When I transform, when the monstrous nature takes over and my body changes into something that transcends human limitations and becomes actual demon-touched creature, I am not simply beast operating on pure instinct, disconnected from conscious thought. I retain my awareness and my ability to make choices, even when my physical form has become something that most people would flee from in absolute terror. The transformation gives me capabilities that my human body cannot achieve, strength and resilience, and certain physical characteristics that the demonic merger created through altering my biology at a fundamental level. He paused, clearly approaching the core of what he needed to confess, but struggling with actually voicing desires that felt too monstrous to share despite Jade's obvious acceptance. And lately, during our intimate moments when I'm carefully maintaining my human form through sheer force of will, I find myself wanting to share my complete self with you. Not just the professor who makes love with normal human anatomy and conventional approaches to physical intimacy, but the monster who possesses capabilities that could bring you pleasure in ways that baseline human male biology simply cannot achieve regardless of skill or dedication. Jade felt her breath catching at Gordon's articulation of what he wanted, recognition that he was offering to show her something he had kept hidden, not because he lacked control, but because he feared she would be repulsed, rather than intrigued by his monstrous capabilities. Her voice, when she responded, carried excitement that transcended just accepting interesting proposition, and became genuine enthusiasm about exploring this aspect of the relationship. You want to make love to me in your transformed state. You want to show me what becomes possible when you stop suppressing the monstrous nature and allow yourself to deploy the capabilities that your demonic transformation created, Gordon. That is not horrifying confession, requiring my reluctant tolerance. That is extraordinary gift you are offering through trusting me with aspects of yourself that you have been hiding because you feared my rejection. She closed the remaining distance between them, her hands reaching for his with gentle certainty that communicated reassurance alongside her obvious interest. I want to see you completely. I want to experience what your transformed body can do when you are not limiting yourself to conventional human approaches to intimacy. Gordon, show me your monster. Show me the demon-touched creature you become, and demonstrate that you can control that form well enough to use it for pleasure rather than just for violence or destruction. Let me love all of you, rather than just the carefully managed portions you have been willing to reveal. Gordon's expression showed he was clearly stunned by her enthusiastic acceptance, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and renewed nervousness about actually proceeding now that she had agreed, rather than being rejected as he had apparently anticipated. You are certain? You genuinely want to experience intimacy with my transformed self, rather than just being gracious about tolerating my confession? Jade, when I transform, when I become the monster, my physical appearance changes in ways that most people find genuinely frightening, rather than just being slightly unsettling. I am not simply larger or stronger human. I am actual demon-touched creature, whose body operates according to different principles than baseline biology. Jade felt her smile widening at Gordon's continued concern, despite her clear enthusiasm, appreciation for his careful attention to her genuine consent, rather than just assuming her acceptance meant she understood what she was agreeing to experience. Her voice carried absolute conviction that transcended just brave declarations, disconnected from actual comprehension of what his transformation entailed. I am certain. I want this. I want to know you completely, including the monstrous aspects that you have been suppressing, because you believe they should remain separate from our intimate relationship. Gordon, transform for me. Show me your demon-touched nature, and then demonstrate that you possess sufficient control to use those capabilities for bringing me pleasure, rather than just for inspiring terror in those who witness your changed form. Gordon nodded slowly, clearly making final decision to actually proceed, rather than continuing to discuss theoretical possibilities, disconnected from taking actual action. His voice carried a mixture of anticipation and appropriate warning about what was about to occur. The transformation is not instantaneous or particularly pleasant to witness. My body restructures itself according to patterns of the demonic possession established. Bones shifting and muscles reforming, and certain entirely new anatomical features emerging that human biology simply does not include regardless of whatever genetic variations might exist within normal parameters. I will try to make the process as smooth as possible, but there will be moments of significant physical change that you should be prepared to witness without becoming frightened about what is happening. He stepped back slightly to provide space for his body to transform without accidentally striking her during the restructuring process. And Jade, if at any point you become uncomfortable or frightened, if you decide that experiencing intimacy with my monstrous form is actually more disturbing than you anticipated when agreeing in abstract, you simply need to tell me to stop, and I will immediately revert to my human shape and will proceed no further with this exploration. Your comfort and your genuine consent matter more than my desire to share this aspect of myself. I will not risk harming you or traumatizing you just to satisfy my need for complete acceptance. Jade settled onto the comfortable seating the chamber provided, wanting to be positioned safely away from Gordon's transformation, while also maintaining clear line of sight to witness the entire process, rather than just seeing the end result, disconnected from understanding what the change actually entailed. Her voice carried encouragement mixed with genuine fascination about what she was about to observe. I am ready. Transform for me, Gordon. Show me the monster you become and trust that I will not flee or become disgusted by witnessing your complete nature, rather than just the carefully managed human presentation you normally maintain. Gordon closed his eyes, his entire body tensing as he stopped fighting the transformation he normally suppressed through constant vigilant effort. The change began with subtle shifts in his posture and his musculature, his frame expanding slightly as enhanced strength manifested through restructured biology. His skin took on darker casts, undertones that suggested something fundamentally other than human genetics determining his appearance. His features sharpened and became more angular, cheekbones more pronounced, and jaw more defined, in ways that moved him from conventionally attractive to something simultaneously beautiful and unsettling. It was when the tentacles emerged that the transformation truly became monstrous, rather than just being enhanced human appearance. Multiple appendages sprouted from his back and his sides, writhing masses of muscular tissue covered in the same darkened skin that now characterized his entire body. The tentacles moved with obvious intelligence and control, their movements precise rather than wild flailing that would suggest Gordon had lost conscious direction over his transformed anatomy. His eyes, when they opened, showed the distinctive quality that marked genuine demonic influence, irises glowing with subtle internal light that human biology simply could not produce regardless of whatever genetic modifications might be attempted through conventional means. But despite the monstrous appearance, despite the tentacles and the glowing eyes, and the overall impression of encountering something that should not exist according to normal biological principles, Gordon's expression showed he retained complete awareness and control, rather than being overwhelmed by bestial instincts disconnected from conscious choice. His voice when he spoke carried deeper resonance than his normal professorial tones, the transformation having apparently affected his vocal structures alongside everything else about his physical form. This is what I become when I stop suppressing the demonic nature. This is the monster that most people would flee from in absolute terror if they encountered me in this state, without understanding that I remain myself despite the radical physical transformation. Jade, you are witnessing aspects of my complete self that I have hidden from you for an entire year of our relationship because I feared this moment when you would finally see the truth and would recognize that being intimate with actual monster might be stepped too far even for someone whose acceptance has been remarkably comprehensive. Jade rose from her seated position, moving toward Gordon's transformed body with deliberate confidence that communicated fascination rather than fear. Her voice when she spoke carried wonder that transcended just being impressed by unusual physical characteristics and became genuine appreciation for the beauty she perceived in his monstrous form. You are magnificent. You are not a horrifying creature, requiring my reluctant tolerance. You are powerful and controlled, and absolutely beautiful in ways that transcend conventional human aesthetics and become something genuinely extraordinary. Gordon, your transformation is not flaw or unfortunate complication. This is capability and strength and physical manifestation of everything you survived when the demon possessed you and merged with your biology. You are not just monster. You are professor who became something more through trauma and violation, and who learned to control that transformation rather than being controlled by it. She reached toward him slowly, wanting him to see that she was approaching without fear despite his monstrous appearance. Her hands found the tentacles first, the appendages that represented most obviously inhuman aspect of his transformed state. The texture was smooth and surprisingly warm despite Gordon's earlier warnings about how disturbing his changed form would be to witness. The tentacles responded to her touch with gentle movements, but suggested curiosity rather than aggression, clearly under Gordon's conscious control rather than operating according to independent instincts. These are beautiful. These are not repulsive or frightening. Gordon, you possess capabilities in this form that could bring incredible pleasure if deployed with care and attention to my responses. Show me what becomes possible when you stop limiting yourself to conventional human approaches. Show me what your monstrous body can do when you are not suppressing these abilities because you fear my rejection. Gordon's transformed features showed emotion that transcended just relief at her acceptance, and became something approaching awe that she was not just tolerating his monstrous nature, but actively expressing enthusiasm about experiencing intimacy with his demon-touched form. His deeper voice carried vulnerability that his usual scholarly reserve normally kept carefully hidden. You genuinely want this. You actually find my transformed body attractive, rather than just being gracious about accepting it, despite your true feelings suggesting you would prefer I remain purely human in appearance and capability. Jade, you are an extraordinary woman whose capacity for loving complete persons, rather than just acceptable portions, continues to humble me despite a year of witnessing your remarkable acceptance of everyone's various complications and unusual natures. He moved closer, his tentacles beginning gentle exploration of her body with touches that communicated desire, mixed with careful attention to her comfort and her responses. The appendages moved across her shoulders and down her arms, their movements controlled and purposeful, rather than being random contact disconnected from conscious intention. When she showed no signs of distress, when her body language and her quickening breath suggested arousal rather than fear, Gordon allowed the tentacles to become more adventurous in their explorations. One appendage traced along her collarbone, while another investigated the curve of her waist. A third wrapped gently around her wrists, the pressure firm enough to demonstrate his strength, but careful enough that she could easily free herself if she chose. The sensations were unlike anything conventional human touch could provide, multiple simultaneous points of contact, creating complexity of stimulation that transcended what even skilled lover with just two hands could achieve regardless of expertise. Jade felt her breath quickening as Gordon's tentacles continued their exploration, the multiple appendages working in coordinated fashion that suggested his complete control over his transformed anatomy despite the radical departure from normal human structure. Her voice, when she managed to speak, carried a mixture of arousal and renewed enthusiasm about discovering what else his monstrous form could accomplish. This is extraordinary. The way you can touch me simultaneously in multiple places, the precision of your control despite having so many appendages to coordinate, Gordon, you were absolutely right that your transformed body creates possibilities that conventional human male anatomy simply cannot match. More. Show me more of what becomes possible. Show me how thoroughly you can pleasure me when you deploy your complete capabilities, rather than limiting yourself to what baseline human lover could provide. Gordon's response was to carefully remove her clothing using his tentacles, the appendages working with surprising dexterity to unfasten buttons and manipulate fabric despite their unusual structure. He was clearly taking his time, drawing out the process of undressing her to build anticipation, while also continuously monitoring her responses to ensure she remained comfortable, rather than becoming overwhelmed by the strangeness of the experience. When she was finally bare before him, when his monstrous form could fully appreciate her exposed beauty without barriers of clothing creating separation, Gordon's tentacles resumed their exploration with renewed intensity. Multiple appendages traced patterns across her skin, some moving with feather-like touches that made her shiver, while others applied firmer pressure that bordered on restraint without crossing into actual bondage that would limit her agency. One tentacle wrapped around her waist, supporting her weight, while others explored her breasts with careful attention to her responses. The sensations were overwhelming in best possible way, pleasure building from multiple simultaneous sources, rather than being focused on single area requiring sequential attention that conventional lovemaking necessarily involved. Gordon was demonstrating that his earlier claims about enhanced capabilities were not just theoretical advantages, but actual, practical benefits that transformed intimacy into something approaching transcendent experience. Jade heard herself making sounds she rarely produced during conventional sex, her vocalizations reflecting the intensity of what Gordon's transformed body was accomplishing through his coordinated deployment of multiple appendages, each working to bring her pleasure. Her voice, when she managed coherent speech, carried desperate need that transcended just physical arousal and became genuine craving for complete connection with his monstrous nature. Gordon, I need you inside me. I need to experience the full extent of what your transformed body can provide, rather than just enjoying external stimulation, however extraordinary that contact might be. Please, show me everything. Show me the complete reality of making love with demon-touched creature who possesses capabilities that transcend human limitations. Gordon's glowing eyes showed mixture of desire and continued careful attention to her genuine consent, clearly wanting to ensure she understood what she was requesting before proceeding to more intimate penetration. His deeper voice carried that blend of arousal and appropriate concern that had characterized his approach throughout this entire encounter. When I enter you in this form, when I use my transformed anatomy for penetration, rather than just for external pleasure, the experience will be considerably more intense than conventional human intercourse regardless of skill or size advantages individual men might possess. My demon-touched nature allows capabilities that normal human male biology simply cannot achieve. I can adjust my size and my texture and my movements in ways that will bring you pleasure beyond anything you have experienced with your other partners, despite their various supernatural capabilities and their obvious dedication to your satisfaction. He positioned his transformed body between her thighs, his monstrous form somehow managing to convey tenderness despite his frightening appearance. But I will proceed carefully, and I will continuously monitor your responses to ensure the intensity remains pleasurable, rather than becoming painful or overwhelming. Jade, you need to promise me that you will communicate clearly if anything becomes too much, or if you need me to adjust my approach. Your pleasure and your comfort matter more than demonstrating my enhanced capabilities, or proving that my monstrous form deserves acceptance through providing transcendent sexual experience. Jade pulled him closer with her hands, while his tentacles continued their coordinated stimulation of her body. The combination of conventional embrace and monstrous touch, creating perfect synthesis of his dual nature. Her voice carried absolute trust that transcended just brave declarations and became genuine confidence in his control and his dedication to her well-being. I trust you completely. I trust that you will not harm me or overwhelm me beyond what I can handle. Gordon, I want to experience everything your transformed body can provide. I want to know you completely, including the monstrous capabilities that you have been suppressing because you feared my rejection. Make love to me the way only demon-touched creature can. Show me pleasures that conventional human anatomy could never achieve, regardless of however skilled the lover might be. Gordon's response was to finally penetrate her, his transformed anatomy entering her with careful precision that communicated his complete control despite the obvious intensity of his own arousal. The sensation was immediately overwhelming in ways that justified his earlier warnings, his demon-touched nature allowing him to fill her more completely than any of her human or humanoid partners could achieve, while also creating textures and movements that transcended what conventional human male anatomy permitted. But most extraordinarily, Gordon's tentacles continued their external stimulation even as his primary anatomy moved within her, the coordinated assault on multiple pleasure centers simultaneously creating cascade of sensations that normal human nervous systems struggle to process effectively. One appendage found her most sensitive external point and began precise rhythmic stimulation perfectly timed to complement his internal movements. Other tentacles caressed her breasts and wrapped around her thighs and traced patterns across her skin that somehow enhanced rather than distracted from the primary penetration. Jade felt her consciousness fragmenting under the overwhelming pleasure, her body responding to stimulation that exceeded anything she had experienced during 6 years of intimate relationships with 54 different partners, whose various capabilities and dedication had taught her she possessed considerable capacity for sexual pleasure. But Gordon's transformed body was teaching her she had barely scratched the surface of what became possible when lover possessed both supernatural capabilities and absolute dedication to providing transcendent experience. Her climax when it came was explosive in ways that transcended just physical satisfaction and became something approaching spiritual experience, pleasure radiating through her entire being in ways that seemed to persist far longer than normal orgasmic response, regardless of intensity. Gordon continued his coordinated stimulation throughout her climax, his demon-touched control allowing him to extend and intensify her pleasure beyond what purely human biology would have permitted through his precise understanding of exactly what touches and movements and pressures would maximize her satisfaction. When she finally came down from the peak, when her body had processed the overwhelming sensations enough that conscious thought became possible again, Jade found herself gasping Gordon's name repeatedly, while tears of overwhelmed joy streamed down her face. Her voice, when she managed coherent speech, carried wonder that transcended just appreciation for skilled lovemaking, and became genuine awe at what his monstrous form had accomplished. That was extraordinary beyond anything I imagined when I asked you to share your transformed nature. You brought me pleasure that I did not know was possible, despite my considerable experience with various partners whose supernatural capabilities I believed had already shown me the limits of what sexual satisfaction could achieve. Gordon, your demon-touched body is not curse or unfortunate complication requiring management. This is a gift that allows you to provide experiences that transcend what conventional lovers could accomplish regardless of their dedication or their expertise. Gordon's transformed features showed emotion that his monstrous appearance somehow made more rather than less visible. Vulnerability and gratitude radiating from him in ways that his usual scholarly reserve normally suppressed beneath careful professional distance. His deeper voice carried roughness that suggested he was barely containing his own emotional overwhelm at her response to experiencing his complete nature. You accepted me. You not only tolerated my monstrous form, but actively enjoyed intimacy with demon-touched creature that most people would flee from in absolute terror. Jade, you gave me gift of complete acceptance that I have desperately needed since the night I was possessed, and transformed into something that transcends human limitations, while also marking me as fundamentally other than what I was before that violation occurred. He remained inside her even as his movements stilled, apparently wanting to maintain their intimate connection while they processed what they had shared, rather than immediately separating and returning to more conventional interaction. His tentacles had gentled their touches, but continued providing contact that communicated continued affection and continued desire to remain close, despite the intensity having passed into satisfied exhaustion. Jade pulled him down so his transformed body covered hers more completely, wanting maximum contact with his monstrous form, rather than maintaining separation that would have been more conventional given his frightening appearance. Her voice carried absolute conviction about what they had accomplished together through his courage to share and her willingness to receive his complete self. You are beautiful in both your forms. You are not a divided person, requiring careful management to keep monstrous nature separate from intimate relationships. You are integrated whole, whose demon-touched capabilities enhance rather than complicate what we share together. Gordon, I want you to feel free to transform during our intimate moments whenever you desire, rather than always suppressing this aspect of yourself because you fear my rejection or because you believe conventional human appearance is only acceptable form for lovemaking. Gordon's glowing eyes showed he was clearly processing her permission to freely deploy his transformed state, rather than limiting it to the single experimental encounter, recognition that she was offering him ongoing acceptance, rather than just one-time tolerance of his monstrous nature. His voice carried mixture of gratitude and slight remaining uncertainty about whether she truly understood what she was committing to through such open-ended acceptance. You're certain you want me to feel free to transform during intimacy, rather than just occasionally when specifically requesting to experience my demon-touched form? Jade, I'm not certain I possess sufficient control to always properly manage the intensity when my transformed body becomes aroused and desires to provide maximum pleasure through deploying all my enhanced capabilities. I worry that frequent exposure to that intensity might eventually overwhelm you or might normalize the experience until it no longer feels special, or might create expectations that my human form can never quite satisfy despite my genuine dedication to your pleasure, regardless of which body I'm inhabiting. Jade felt her smile widening at Gordon's characteristic concern about potential complications, despite her clear enthusiasm, appreciation for his thoughtful consideration, even when his anxiety might be creating problems that would never actually manifest if he simply trusted her assessment about what she wanted from their intimate relationship. Her voice carried gentle correction of his assumptions, alongside renewed expression of her genuine desires. I want both versions of you. I want the professor who makes love with careful human touch and conventional approaches, and I want the demon-touched monster who can bring me pleasure that transcends what baseline human anatomy permits regardless of skill. You do not have to choose between these aspects of yourself or worry that one form will eclipse the other. They are both you, both equally valuable and equally desired, depending on mood and circumstances and what kind of intimacy you are seeking in any particular encounter. She shifted slightly beneath him, the movement causing interesting sensations given that they remained intimately connected despite the immediate intensity having passed. Gordon, you gave me extraordinary gift tonight through finally sharing your complete self, rather than just the carefully managed portions you believed I would find acceptable. Thank you for that trust. Thank you for the courage to actually transform and to demonstrate your capabilities, rather than just theoretically discussing possibilities, disconnected from taking action that made you genuinely vulnerable to my potential rejection. Gordon carefully withdrew from her body, his movements gentle despite the fact that his transformed anatomy made separation more complex process than conventional human male disengagement would require. His tentacles unwrapped from her slowly, each appendage trailing across her skin in final caress before releasing contact entirely. When he had created appropriate space between them, when he was no longer physically connected to her in ways that limited his mobility, Gordon allowed his body to revert to human form through visible effort that suggested maintaining the transformation required considerable ongoing energy, even when he was not actively deploying its enhanced capabilities. The change back was quicker than the initial transformation had been, his body restructuring itself according to familiar human patterns, with practiced efficiency that suggested he had considerable experience with shifting between his two forms, despite generally suppressing the demon-touched nature beneath conscious control. When the process completed, when he stood before her in his normal professorial appearance rather than as monstrous creature, his expression showed vulnerability that transcended just post-coital emotion, and became genuine processing of profound shift in their relationship. His voice when he spoke carried roughness that had nothing to do with his transformed vocal structures and everything to do with barely contained feeling. That was the most intimate experience I have ever shared with anyone. Not just physically, though obviously the sexual component was extraordinary, but emotionally through your complete acceptance of my monstrous nature and your genuine enthusiasm about intimacy with my transformed body, rather than just tolerating it because you love me, despite finding my demon-touched form disturbing. Jade, you saw me completely tonight. You witnessed the monster I become, and you not only accepted but actively desired what that transformation creates. That gift of total recognition, that acknowledgement that all aspects of myself deserve love, rather than just the conventionally acceptable portions, that has healed something in me that years of therapy and genuine support from this household could never quite address because I was still maintaining separation between the professor and the monster. Jade rose to embrace him in his human form, wanting him to understand that her love encompassed both versions, rather than privileging one over the other, despite the intensity of pleasure his transformed body had provided. Her voice carried absolute certainty that transcended just reassuring post-intimate partner, and became genuine articulation of how she perceived their relationship's evolution. You are a whole person now in ways you were not before tonight. You are not carefully managing separate aspects of yourself while hoping no one notices the monster lurking beneath scholarly exterior. You are integrated being whose demon-touched nature complements rather than contradicts your professorial identity. Gordon, what we shared tonight, that was not one-time experiment to satisfy curiosity. That was the beginning of truly complete intimacy that honors all of who you are, rather than just portions you believed were safe to reveal. The evening continued with comfortable conversation as they processed what they had shared and what it meant for their ongoing relationship. Gordon articulated feelings he had suppressed for a year about fearing his monstrous nature would eventually drive Jade away, despite her repeated assurances of complete acceptance. Jade shared her own journey of gradually understanding that Gordon's careful management of his transformation stemmed from genuine terror about rejection, rather than just from appropriate caution about deploying dangerous capabilities around people who might be harmed by loss of control. By the time they finally dressed and prepared to return to the castle's main areas, by the time immediate afterglow had settled into deeper understanding about what they had accomplished together, something fundamental had shifted in Gordon's demeanor. The anxiety that had characterized so much of his presence in the household had eased, replaced by quiet confidence that came from being genuinely known and genuinely accepted, rather than just being tolerated despite uncomfortable truths requiring careful management. As they walked together through the labyrinth's impossible corridors, as they moved from isolated chamber back toward the family's communal spaces, Gordon's voice carried question that his newfound confidence apparently made possible to articulate. Would you be willing to occasionally share with certain family members that I have integrated my transformed nature into our intimate relationship? Not detailed descriptions, obviously, but just acknowledgement that I'm no longer suppressing the demon-touched aspects of myself because I fear judgment about being a monster who somehow deserves love, despite fundamental violation of normal human biology. Jade felt warmth blooming at Gordon's question, recognition that he was ready to be more open about his complete self, rather than maintaining careful separation between his public presentation and his private reality. Her voice carried enthusiasm that honored his courage, while also respecting his remaining boundaries about what details should remain private versus what could be shared more broadly. Of course. I think several people would benefit from knowing that you have taken the step toward integration, rather than continuing to compartmentalize your identity into acceptable and unacceptable portions. Gordon, your journey toward accepting your transformed nature might provide hope for others in the household who struggle with their own monstrous aspects, or who fear that certain characteristics disqualify them from deserving complete love, rather than just partial acceptance. They continued walking together, two people whose bond had deepened through profound intimacy that honored the complete truth of who Gordon was, rather than just his carefully curated public presentation. And somewhere in an impossible castle between realities, Monster had learned to embrace rather than suppress his demon-touched nature, discovering that true acceptance required sharing complete self, rather than just portions deemed safe enough to reveal without risking rejection. Welcome to understanding that Monster's capabilities could enhance intimacy when deployed with control and care. Welcome to recognition that demon-touched transformation deserved integration rather than suppression. Welcome to knowledge that complete acceptance meant loving all aspects of partner, rather than just conventionally acceptable portions, requiring no special courage to embrace. The Monster had been accepted completely. The intimate encounter had transformed both participants, and the beautiful chaos continued, enriched by the presence of Professor, whose demon-touched nature no longer required hiding, but instead became source of extraordinary pleasure and deepened connection when shared with partner, whose love transcended conventional boundaries about what bodies and capabilities deserved acceptance versus requiring management. Episode 118, The Animagus Menagerie. The morning sun filtered through the labyrinth's impossible windows, casting patterns of light that shifted between realities with each passing moment. The castle hummed with its usual organized chaos,